Why would a country worship war criminals as heroes? Think about that for a second. In the heart of Tokyo, there is a place called Yasukuni Shrine. Inside this shrine, 14 Class A war criminals are enshrined. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were men sentenced to death at the Tokyo trials for planning aggressive wars, for massacring civilians, and for conducting human experiments. And yet today, their names sit side by side with 2.46 million so-called souls who died for their country. This shrine is considered one of the most sacred places in Japan. Japanese politicians visit it. They bow, they pray, and they insist they are simply honoring the war dead. So what's really going on here? Because this story is not just about Japan not apologizing. It's far more complicated than that. It involves culture, politics, and a carefully constructed version of history. If you want to understand why historical wounds in East Asia still haven't healed, you have to understand this issue. Who exactly is being worshipped? Let's start with a simple question. Who are these so-called heroic spirits enshrined at Yasukuni Shrine? On October 17, 1978, Yasukuni Shrine carried out a secret enshrinement ceremony. No public announcement, no media coverage. Quietly, the spirit tablets of 14 Class A war criminals were placed inside the shrine. Among them was Hideki Tojo, Japan's wartime prime minister, one of the main architects of Japan's aggressive war in Asia and a key figure behind the Nanjing massacre. There was also Kenji Doihara, the mastermind behind the creation of Manchukuo, a man deeply involved in espionage, assassinations, and covert military operations across China. Then there was Iwane Matsui, commander of the Central China Area Army during the Nanjing massacre, and Koki Hirota, Japan's foreign minister during the war, who knew about the atrocities and allowed them to continue. And this is just the beginning, because Yasukuni Shrine doesn't only enshrine Class A war criminals, it also enshrines 1,068 Class B and Class C war criminals. These were the people who carried out atrocities directly, soldiers who bayoneted infants, officers who buried civilians alive, guards who tortured prisoners of war. Their hands were stained with blood. Now, imagine something for a moment. Imagine Germany building a shrine in the center of Berlin. Inside it, the spirits of Hitler, Goering, and Eichmann are enshrined. And imagine the German chancellor visiting that shrine every year. What would the world say? It would be unthinkable. And yet, this is effectively what is happening in Japan. What makes this even more disturbing is that these men were convicted by the international community itself. The Tokyo trials were humanity's first systematic attempt to judge crimes of aggressive war and crimes against humanity. They were the Asian equivalent of the Nuremberg trials. The verdict spanned more than 1,200 pages. The evidence was overwhelming. 7 Class A war criminals were executed, 16 were sentenced to life imprisonment, and today, they are remembered as heroes who died for their country. The cultural code. How do Japanese view death? To understand why Japan can enshrine war criminals, you first need to understand how Japan views death itself. This goes much deeper than politics. It begins with Shinto, Japan's indigenous belief system, and a set of cultural assumptions that feel very different from those in the West. In Shinto belief, death has a kind of purifying effect. No matter what a person did while alive, once they die, they become a spirit. And as a spirit, their sins are believed to dissolve. In simple terms, the dead are sacred. This idea exists in many cultures, but in Japan, it goes much further. From this perspective, the deceased have already paid the ultimate price, their lives, and therefore their wrongdoing should be forgiven. This belief is closely tied to Japan's long tradition of ancestor worship. In Japanese households, ancestors are not judged, they are honored. Every year during the Obon festival, families return home, light lanterns, and welcome the spirits of their ancestors back. No one asks whether an ancestor was right or wrong. The logic is simple. You are my ancestor, so I must worship you. It is not a choice, it is an obligation. Yasukuni Shrine takes this family logic and scales it up to the level of the nation. Those who died for the country, no matter what they did in life, are treated as the nation's ancestors. Under this framework, a man like Hideki Tojo and an ordinary foot soldier are placed on the same level. They both died for their country, and therefore they are both worthy of worship. This is where individual responsibility starts to disappear. Because Japanese society has a strong collectivist tradition, actions are often seen as the result of the group, not the individual. War, in this mindset, is not the crime of specific leaders. It is the action of the entire nation. So even though Hideki Tojo planned aggressive wars, many Japanese people see him not as a criminal, but as someone who simply carried out the will of the state, a product of his time, a cog in a larger machine. And when responsibility is shared by everyone, it becomes easy for no one to take responsibility at all. There is another cultural layer here, the distorted legacy of Bushido. Traditional Bushido emphasized loyalty, courage, and personal honor. But in modern Japan, this philosophy was twisted into extreme militarism. Dying for the country was elevated into the highest possible virtue. Once that happens, death itself becomes proof of righteousness. Under this value system, someone who dies in war automatically becomes a hero. Whether the war was just or unjust becomes secondary, and this leads to a disturbing paradox. In Japan, the victims of the atomic bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki are mourned every year with solemn national ceremonies. But at the same time, the architects of atrocities like the Nanjing massacre are also mourned and enshrined. From the outside, this feels deeply contradictory, but within this cultural logic, it isn't, because both groups are framed as victims of war. And that is the danger. When everyone becomes a victim, the line between aggressor and victim disappears. The line between justice and injustice is erased. Now compare this with Western Christian culture. In Christianity, sin does not disappear with death. Individuals are responsible for their actions. Confession, guilt, and atonement are central concepts. Under this framework, Germany was able to conduct a deep and painful reckoning with its Nazi past. But within Shinto's worldview, this kind of reflection is fundamentally difficult. Not because Japanese people are incapable of reflection, but because the cultural framework itself does not easily allow it. Manipulating memory. How is history rewritten? Culture lays the foundation, but culture alone does not explain everything. The more direct reason lies in how post-war Japan has systematically shaped historical memory. Let's start with textbooks. In Japan, history textbooks are strictly reviewed by the Ministry of Education. Any content that is considered too critical of Japan's wartime actions can be modified or removed. Words matter here. Aggression becomes advancement. Invasion becomes expansion. The Nanjing massacre is softened into the Nanjing incident. The death toll shifts from 300,000 to vague phrases like, "There are differing views." The comfort women system is often omitted entirely or described as voluntary participation. And Unit 731, which conducted human experiments on living prisoners, is simply not mentioned in many textbooks at all. This is not accidental. There is a well-known case that illustrates this clearly. A historian named Saburo Ienaga wrote a textbook that documented Japan's war crimes in detail. The Ministry of Education refused to approve it. Ienaga fought back. What followed was a 32-year legal battle against the Japanese government. In 1997, he finally won a partial victory. But even after that, his textbook was rarely adopted by schools. This struggle became known as Japan's textbook war, but textbooks are only one part of it. There is also a battle over how the war itself is named. In Japan's official narrative, the war is often called the Greater East Asia War. Not a war of aggression, not a war of conquest, but a war of liberation. This language reframes Japan as a force-fighting Western colonialism, rather than one building its own empire. Aggression is repackaged as moral responsibility, and then there is the construction of a victim narrative. Japan's own suffering during the war is constantly emphasized. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Tokyo fire bombings, the Battle of Okinawa. Every year, on August 6th and 9th, Japan holds solemn national ceremonies. Moments of silence, white doves, messages of peace. There is nothing wrong with mourning civilian suffering. The problem is what comes next. These experiences become the center of Japan's national memory. Japan is remembered first and foremost as a victim of war, a victim of atomic bombs, a victim of American occupation. Meanwhile, the suffering Japan inflicted on others is pushed to the margins, mentioned briefly, or not at all. This creates a distorted memory. Japanese society remembers its own pain clearly while selectively forgetting the pain it caused. Now compare this with Germany. In Germany, students learn in detail about Nazi crimes. They visit concentration camps. They study the Holocaust as a core part of national education. German leaders have publicly apologized on international stages. German remembrance is built around responsibility, so why could Germany do this while Japan could not? One key reason is the preservation of the emperor system. During the Tokyo trials, the United States made a strategic decision. For Cold War reasons, Emperor Hirohito was not put on trial. He remained the symbolic head of state until his death in 1989. This created a deep contradiction. If the emperor was innocent, how should the war conducted in his name be understood? If the emperor bore no responsibility, what about the soldiers who fought under imperial command? This ambiguity gave post-war Japan room to evade responsibility. Because if the highest authority was never questioned, then full reflection was never required. Germany had a clear rupture. The Nazi regime collapsed. Hitler was dead. Nazi symbols were banned. Germany could say, that was Nazi evil. Japan never had such a clean break. The emperor remained. National continuity was preserved, and without a rupture, there was no moment of complete reckoning. The consequences are visible today. Surveys show that more than 40% of young Japanese do not know about the Nanjing massacre. More than 60% have never heard of Unit 731. This is not ignorance by accident. It is the result of systematic historical amnesia. And that may be the most dangerous outcome of all, because a society that does not understand its past is far more likely to repeat it. Political bargaining. Who keeps this alive? Culture matters, education matters, but neither of them alone can explain why the Yasukuni Shrine issue keeps resurfacing. At its core, this is a political problem. Let's start with domestic politics. In Japan, visiting Yasukuni Shrine is not a private religious act. It is a political signal. For conservative politicians, it is a way to demonstrate patriotism. To certain voters, especially right-wing groups, a Yasukuni visit is a loyalty test. If you visit, you are seen as strong. If you don't, you are accused of being weak, of bowing to China and Korea. And in politics, perception matters. One of the most famous examples is Junichiro Koizumi. From 2001 to 2006, Koizumi visited Yasukuni Shrine every single year while in office. China and South Korea protested. Diplomatic relations froze. Koizumi knew this would happen. he did it anyway. Why? Because his core support base came from conservative factions within the Liberal Democratic Party and from right-wing organizations like Nippon Kaigi. By visiting Yasukuni, Koizumi consolidated his base. He gained political capital at home, even as relations abroad collapsed. Then there is Shinzo Abe. Abe's grandfather, Nobusuke Kishi, was once a Class A war criminal suspect who was later released. Abe grew up in an environment that framed Japan as a victim and dismissed the Tokyo trials as victor's justice. In 2013, Abe visited Yasukuni Shrine. The international backlash was immediate, but inside Japan, his approval rating rose. That tells you something important. A significant portion of the Japanese public supports these actions. Behind this support is a powerful interest group, the Japan War-Bereaved Families Association. This organization represents families of those who died in the war. It has over 1 million members. They are organized, they vote, and they matter. For decades, they have been a key constituency of the Liberal Democratic Party. Their core demand is clear: maintain Yasukuni Shrine status, oppose any removal of war criminals from enshrinement. Any politician who wants their support must take a stance on Yasukuni. But the political stakes go even deeper. There is the issue of constitutional revision. Japan's current constitution, especially Article 9, renounces war. It was written during the American occupation. Conservatives in Japan have long wanted to revise it, to become a normal country, to have a regular military. But here's the problem. If Japan openly admits that its wartime actions were criminal and aggressive, how do you convince the public to support rearmament? You can't. So the past must be softened. Aggression must be reframed. War must be beautified. And visiting Yasukuni Shrine becomes part of this process. On the international level, Yasukuni is also used as diplomatic leverage. When relations with China are tense, Japanese politicians visit the shrine. It sends a message of defiance at home and pressure abroad. When Japan wants to improve relations, visits suddenly stop. Yasukuni becomes a bargaining chip. The United States' position has also been inconsistent. During the Cold War, America needed Japan as a frontline ally, so it largely turned a blind eye to Japan's historical issues. Many war criminals were released early. Some re-entered politics. Others entered business. Former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney once described the Yasukuni issue as Japan's internal affair. Statements like that emboldened Japan's right wing. And finally, there are economic interests. Some of Japan's largest conglomerates, companies like Mitsubishi and Sumitomo, used forced labor during the war. A full historical reckoning could open the door to massive compensation claims. So these companies also have incentives to support historical ambiguity. Through political donations and lobbying, they help shape policy. When you put all of this together, you start to see the full picture. Yasukuni Shrine is not just a religious site, it is a political ecosystem. Votes, ideology, diplomacy, money, all intertwined. And that is why this issue refuses to disappear.